On March 10th, 2023, a decision was made. A decision so chilling, so unfathomable, it would send shockwaves through the hearts of anyone who heard it. A mother boarded a plane to paradise, leaving behind not just her home, but her 2-year-old daughter, Amaya, locked inside their apartment. For 6 days, the world moved on. Drinks were poured, music blasted, and luxury dripped from every moment. Laughter echoed over the ocean as Cristel Candelario lived her dream life in Hawaii. But behind a locked door, far away from the sun-soaked beaches and glittering parties, something unimaginable was happening. Something no one knew. Something no one could have imagined. How cold does a mother have to be to do something like this? How could she wake up each day, day 1, day 2, day 3, drinking, partying, shopping, and never once feel the ache for her child? She could have taken her to a friend's place, a relative's home, anywhere but there. But she didn't. She locked the door, walked away, and never looked back. I can't imagine the pain that child went through, waiting, crying, starving. She could have made a different choice, but she didn't. And by the time someone finally knocked on that door, it was already too late. Welcome to True Crime Seeker. A special thank you to my viewers, most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing daily told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. What makes a mother abandon her child? Is it selfishness, desperation, or something much darker? Before the trip, before the partying, before she walked out and left her child alone, let's go back to how it all started. Her name was Cristel Candelario, 33 years old, a woman who craved the fast life, the attention, the excitement, the luxury. Born and raised in Atlanta, her childhood was anything but stable. Her mother, a woman battling her own demons, was in and out of prison. By the time Cristel was 6, she was shuffled into the foster system. Different homes, different faces, no real family, no real love. She learned early, attention was currency. If no one was going to love her for who she was, then she would make sure they noticed her for what she had. In high school, she was the girl who always knew the latest trends, the one who could charm her way into VIP sections, even when she had nothing in her pockets. She wanted out of Atlanta, out of the struggle. College was a fleeting idea. She enrolled, but the classes, the structure, it all felt like a waste of time. There were easier ways to make it, faster ways. She dropped out. Failed relationships followed. Men who promised her the world, but never delivered. She wanted more. But work? Stability? That wasn't the life she envisioned. She was obsessed with social media, the women on Instagram, draped in designer, traveling the world, shopping, popping bottles in the club. None of them looked like they worked a real job. And if they could do it, why couldn't she? Cristel wanted to be an influencer, the type of woman who didn't chase money, money chased her. She convinced herself that she was meant for more, not the mundane, not the routine of waking up, working and struggling. That wasn't her story. But then something happened, something she never planned for. She got pregnant. The father? A man she had no intention of being tied to for life. A quick fling, an impulsive decision. And now the kind of consequence she never wanted to face. She thought about her options. She could have ended it. But a part of her thought, maybe this is my chance. Maybe I'll finally have someone who loves me unconditionally. That feeling didn't last. When her daughter Amaya was born, reality hit her harder than she expected. The sleepless nights, the crying, the responsibility. Motherhood wasn't glamorous. It wasn't like what the influencers made it look like. It wasn't photo shoots and cute matching outfits. It was exhaustion, sacrifice, a weight she never wanted to carry. She loved her daughter, but she resented her too, because the life she had envisioned, the luxury, the attention, the endless nights of fun, felt further and further away. Crystal never said it out loud, but in her heart, she knew the truth. She saw Amaya as a burden, a child who tied her down, who kept her from the life she truly wanted. She told herself, I can't be trapped like my mum was. I need to live before life passes me by. And while Amaya clung to her, loved her, looked up at her with innocent eyes, Crystal felt trapped. Every time she rocked her baby to sleep, every time she changed a diaper, every time she stayed up while her friends were out living the life she once had, she felt trapped. The influencers she followed on Instagram didn't have this problem. The women who flaunted their trips, their designer bags, their carefree lifestyles, none of them had a child pulling at their leg, keeping them from the fun. She started thinking of ways to escape. At first, it was just small moments. A night out while her neighbor babysat. A weekend trip while her mother's old friend watched Amaya. But it wasn't enough. She wanted to be free. Crystal was already looking for a way out. What makes a man powerful? Is it money, status, or the ability to make people believe he is untouchable? For Luis Lujo Rivera, power wasn't just about wealth. It was about perception. At just 22 years old, he had already built a reputation. A king in a world of illusion. Everywhere he went, people whispered his name. The women wanted him. The men envied him. And on Instagram, he was unstoppable. Stacks of $100 bills laid out on penthouse balconies. A different luxury car every week. Lamborghinis, Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, exclusive clubs, bottle service, expensive watches, always surrounded by women, always the life of the party. His motto was simple: if you ain't living fast, you ain't living. But what most people didn't know was that everything he had was stolen. Luis was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, but San Juan was never home. His mother, a hard-working woman, tried to keep him on the right path. But the right path, it never made money fast enough. He saw his mother struggle, working double shifts just to put food on the table, bills piling up, rent overdue, electricity getting shut off. He made a promise to himself: I will never be broke again. By the time he was 13, he had already figured out the system. At first, it was small things: stealing credit card numbers, selling fake sneakers, flipping stolen electronics. But Luis wasn't like the other kids. He was smarter. He learned how money really worked. And by the time he turned 17, he was deep into credit fraud and identity theft. A mastermind in the making. At 19, Luis left San Juan and moved to Miami. He wasn't looking for a fresh start. He was looking for opportunity. Miami was the perfect playground. A city built on wealth, excess, and secrets. A place where scammers thrived and no one asked questions. He found the right people, learned the tricks of the trade. He created fake businesses, took out fraudulent loans, stole identities, social security numbers, bank credentials. This wasn't petty crime anymore. This was organized fraud at the highest level. Luis wasn't just making thousands, he was making millions. And he lived like it. The best hotels, the finest jewelry, designer everything. To the world, he was a self-made boss. To law enforcement, a ghost. But what he didn't know was that the FBI was already watching. They had been tracking his movements for months, following his money trails, waiting for the right moment to bring him down. But Luis, he was too busy living fast to see what was coming. Cristel Candelario had spent her whole life chasing luxury. And when she saw Luis Rivera on her Instagram feed, she knew instantly, that's the life I want. She wasn't interested in love. She was interested in access, the way he lived, the way he spent money like it meant nothing. She studied his page. The women around him were beautiful, flawless, carefree. They didn't worry about bills. They didn't struggle. They just existed in a world of power, money, and indulgence. A world Crystal wanted to be part of. She didn't hesitate. She sent him a message. No small talk. No hesitation. You got a spot for me? Most women played the waiting game, not Crystal. She wanted in. And Luis? He liked women who knew what they wanted. She was beautiful, confident, hungry. She fit the image. And to Luis, image was everything. What she didn't tell him. There was one thing Crystal left out, one detail she never mentioned. She had a child, a little girl who depended on her. But in Crystal's mind, Amaya didn't fit into this world. Amaya was the past. Luis was the future. She wasn't about to risk losing her chance over something as inconvenient as a baby. So she never told him. She pretended she was just like the other women in his life, free, available, without baggage. And when Luis invited her to Hawaii, she didn't hesitate. She booked her ticket, packed her bags, and without a second thought, she left her child behind. March 9th, 2023. A notification lit up Crystal's phone. Luis Rivera, the man she had been watching for weeks, the one who lived the life she wanted. Come to Hawaii with me. She didn't hesitate, didn't ask how long, didn't ask why, didn't ask what the occasion was. The only thing that mattered was that he asked. Her fingers moved fast. When? His reply was instant. Tomorrow. She didn't need time to think, didn't need to make excuses. She was going. Excitement rushed through her. Hawaii, first-class flights, private yachts, designer shopping, the kind of trip she had only seen in influencer vlogs. She imagined herself walking along the beach in a designer swimsuit, posing for pictures, drinking champagne under the sun. It was the life she had always wanted. And now, it was hers. She spent the night picking outfits, scrolling through Instagram for inspiration. Which bikini would get the most likes? Which dress would make her look expensive? She took out her best heels, her favorite wig, her expensive perfume. She lined up makeup palettes she barely used. Every detail had to be perfect. Not once did she stop to think about her daughter. For a brief moment, the thought crossed her mind. What about Amaya? But the thought was fleeting, more of an inconvenience than a concern. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring at her suitcase, weighing her options. She could drop Amaya off with a friend, but that meant explaining, answering questions, facing judgment, or she could leave her alone. She hated being questioned. She didn't want to be reminded of reality, so she convinced herself, I'll just leave some food. She'll be fine. She walked into the kitchen, grabbed a bottle and filled it with milk. She placed it near Amaya's crib. That was enough. A 2-year-old didn't eat much, right? She wiped her hands on her dress and walked out. Problem solved. March 10th, 2023. 6 a.m. The sun had barely risen. The world outside was quiet. Crystal stood by the door, her suitcase beside her. The Uber would be here soon. Behind her, in the dim light of the apartment, Amaya was awake. She wasn't crying, wasn't fussing, just watching. Tiny fingers gripping the crib rail, wide brown eyes locked on her mother. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew her mother was leaving. Crystal grabbed her purse, checked her lipstick in the mirror, made sure she looked good. She didn't say goodbye, didn't check to see if there was enough food, didn't even glance back. She stepped outside, pulled the door shut, and walked away. She never thought about how long 6 days really was. 2 years old, alone. Couldn't cook, couldn't change her diaper, couldn't call for help. A child trapped in an apartment. No one knew she was there. No one would come. 6 days. No food, no water, no warmth, no comfort. Not every woman is meant to be a mother. Crystal stepped off the plane into a world she had only dreamed of. The warm Hawaiian breeze kissed her skin as she walked through the private terminal where a black SUV waited. Luis Rivera stood by the car, dressed in designer, his chains glistening under the morning sun. The driver, dressed in a crisp suit, opened the door for them. She climbed in, feeling like she had finally made it. The ride to the hotel felt surreal. Towering palm trees lined the streets. The ocean stretched endlessly beside them. She was here, living the life. No responsibilities, no worries, no distractions, no Amaya. They pulled up to the most expensive five-star resort on the island. A private suite with floor-to-ceiling windows. A balcony overlooking the ocean. Champagne on ice, waiting inside. Crystal spun around, taking it all in. This was it. The life she deserved. That night, the party started. VIP sections, flowing champagne, flashing lights, luxury all around her. Crystal posed for pictures, picked the best angles, used the best filters. Luxury life. Blessed. Bar vacation mode. She soaked in the attention, danced on the couches, let strangers pour drinks into her mouth. She had never felt more alive. March 11th, 2023. Day 2. The morning started with room service and expensive gifts. Luis tossed a stack of cash onto the bed. "Go crazy," he said, and she did. High-end boutiques, designer bags, diamond jewelry. She picked out everything she ever wanted and never had to check a price tag. She walked out of the store, carrying thousands of dollars in luxury, feeling like she belonged in this world. That night, another club, another VIP section, another round of endless drinks. She leaned into Luis, laughing as he whispered into her ear. Here, this was her life now. Not once did she think about Amaya. March 12th, 2023. Day 3. A yacht party, the kind she had only seen in music videos. A private dock, a massive white yacht, crystal clear water stretching for miles. She stepped onto the deck, champagne already in her hand, the sun setting behind her. Music blasted through the speakers. Luis sat back, laughing, surrounded by women. She danced. Let the music take her. Let the alcohol wash away any thought of reality, any thought of home. She hadn't checked her phone, hadn't sent a single message to check in. Amaya was an afterthought. March 13th, 2023. Day 4. More shopping, more partying, more luxury. It all blurred together. Different nights, same drinks, same people, same lifestyle. She was exhausted, but she didn't care. She was finally living. Luis spent more time on his phone. He disappeared into private conversations. The energy started shifting. Something was off. But Crystal didn't ask, didn't care. As long as the money kept flowing, the lifestyle kept going, nothing else mattered. March 14th, 2023. Day 5. The tension grew. Luis seemed restless, distracted. He wasn't flashing as much money. He was watching the doors, taking calls in hushed tones. Crystal ignored it. It wasn't her problem. She had what she wanted. That night, she sat in their suite, scrolling through pictures of herself, choosing the best ones for Instagram. Not once did she wonder what was happening back home. While her daughter starved, she was sipping cocktails. While her daughter lay alone in the dark, she was draped in silk robes, soaking in bubble baths. Amaya didn't exist in this world. March 15th, 2023. Day 6. Loud, banging on the suite door. Then chaos. Doors burst open, men in suits, guns drawn, shouting orders. FBI. Before Crystal could react, she was grabbed, thrown against the wall, hands wrenched behind her back. She was dragged into the hallway, her breath coming in sharp gasps, her heartbeat slamming in her chest. She turned her head, watched as Luis was led away, expression blank, screaming commands. Everything moved too fast. She panicked. "I didn't do anything. I'm not part of this." They didn't care. She was cuffed, pulled into the hallway. Luis lay on the floor, his face blank, as if he had been expecting this. Her heart pounded as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Then she thought of her phone. Then she thought of her life. Then she remembered Amaya. A deep, sinking horror filled her stomach. "I have a baby," she blurted, voice cracking. "I have a baby. I need to go back to my baby." The detective closest to her froze. "How old?" Without thinking, she whispered, "Less than 3. The room went still. "Where is she?" Her lips trembled. "At home." "With who?" "Her—" She paused. "She's with her granny or anyone?" Silence. Who is watching her? She couldn't answer. The detective's expression darkened. How long have you been gone? She swallowed hard. Her voice cracked. 6 days. A long pause, a heavy silence. The detective blinked, as if trying to process the impossible. Who has been feeding her? No response. Who has been changing her? No response. He took a deep breath. His eyes sharpened. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Are you telling me that your child has been alone in that apartment for 6 days? Crystal's hands were shaking. She was still cuffed, still standing in the middle of the chaos, but none of it mattered anymore. For the first time, the weight of what she had done crashed into her. She had food, she mumbled weakly. The detective clenched his jaw. What food? Her mind scrambled. What had she left? A bottle of milk, some snacks. Was that enough? The detective turned, pulled out his phone, and made a call. The room around her faded. She barely heard the agents talking, because at that moment, she knew what they were going to find, and she knew it was already too late. March 15th, 2023, 6:30 a.m. The detective's call was urgent. Atlanta PD. We have a 2-year-old child abandoned in an apartment. Mother's been gone for 6 days. Get there now. Across the country, officers raced through the quiet Atlanta neighborhood, a modest apartment complex, a place where people minded their own business. But something had been off for days. A neighbor was already on the phone with 911. There's been crying coming from the apartment for days. I don't think anyone is home. The operator's voice was steady. Have you seen the mother? A pause. Number, I haven't seen her in almost a week. Then another silence. I thought the crying stopped because someone came back. It was the same apartment. The officers arrived. They knocked. No answer. They called out. Silence. A decision was made. They forced entry. The stench hit them first. Stale air, rotting food, a mix of neglect and decay. They stepped inside. The living room was eerily still. Toys scattered, a sippy cup knocked over, a tiny pink shoe near the couch. Then they saw her, a small body curled up on the floor. Too still. A bottle beside her, empty. A diaper unchanged for days. No movement, no sounds. An officer called out her name, but there was no response. Another officer crouched down, reaching for her wrist. He pressed his fingers gently against her skin. Then silence. No one spoke. No one moved, because at that moment, they knew. The neighbor gasped, hands over her mouth. Oh my God, oh my God. One of the officers closed his eyes, exhaled sharply. This wasn't supposed to happen. A radio crackled. We need paramedics now. But in their hearts, they already knew. It was too late. March 15th, 2023, 9 a.m. Crystal sat in an interrogation room, hands cuffed, her face streaked with tears. I didn't mean for this to happen. It wasn't supposed to be this way. A detective stared at her, his voice low. You left a 2-year-old alone for 6 days. She shook her head violently. She had food. The detective's hands clenched into fists. A bottle of milk. That's what you left her with. She sobbed. Denial, regret, realization. But it didn't matter anymore, because nothing could change what had already been done. September 5th, 2023. Trial begins. The courtroom was tense. Every seat filled. Friends, mothers clutching their children. Strangers who had followed every detail since the day Crystal was arrested. The cameras flashed, capturing the woman who had become one of the most hated figures in the community. She sat at the defense table, hands trembling, wearing a dull prison uniform. Nothing like the designer outfits she once flaunted. No expensive wigs, no perfectly done makeup. Just a woman stripped of everything but the weight of her actions. She stared straight ahead, eyes vacant, face drained of the arrogance she once carried. In front of her, a jury that had already formed an opinion before the trial even started. The prosecutor stood, walked to the center of the room, and faced the jury. His voice was calm, but there was no mercy in his words. This was not a case of a struggling mother making a mistake. This was not a tragic accident. This was a choice. He stepped toward the jury, his voice sharper now. Cristel Candelario chose to pack her bags, chose to buy her ticket, chose to board that plane, chose to party while her child was locked inside an apartment with no food, no water, no one to care for her. She chose to drink champagne on yachts while her daughter starved. He picked up a folder, pulled out photographs, and laid them out for the jury to see. One by one, he exposed the evidence. Receipts from high-end boutiques, proof of extravagant dinners, club entries, Instagram pictures of Cristel in designer outfits, standing on balconies, flashing peace signs, captioning her moments with hashtags like blessed, just vacation mode, just luxury life. The jury flinched. The contrast was unbearable. While she was in paradise, her 2-year-old lay dying in a dark apartment, a half-empty bottle beside her, a soaked diaper, a tiny body too weak to cry for help. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecutor continued, this was not negligence. This was intentional. A woman who saw motherhood as a burden, a child as an obstacle, a responsibility she never wanted. And so she did what was easiest. She walked away. He turned to Cristel now, his gaze like ice. She was clear enough to pack her bags, clear enough to book her flight, clear enough to pose for pictures. But suddenly, we are to believe that she was too mentally unwell to remember she had a child. His voice cut through the courtroom like a knife. We don't get to cherry-pick when we're competent. She knew exactly what she was doing. Cristel sat motionless, eyes locked on the table, tears slipping down her face. Whether it was regret or the realization that there was no escaping the consequences, no one could say. Her defense attorney rose, smoothing the front of his suit. This is a tragedy, he said, voice lower, measured. What happened to Amaya was a terrible, devastating mistake. But Cristel Candelario is not a monster. He turned to the jury, hands clasped. Postpartum depression is real. The mental toll of single motherhood, the overwhelming stress, the loneliness. This is a woman who was drowning, who made a desperate, irrational decision. She did not plan to harm her child. She simply made the wrong choice. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if appealing to their sense of compassion. Ask yourself, have you ever made a mistake? One you wish you could take back? One that, had the circumstances been slightly different, might have had consequences you never intended? He let the words settle, then turned toward the judge. Life in prison is too extreme. Cristel needs help, not a lifetime behind bars. The prosecutor was on his feet again. Help. He let out a breath, shaking his head. Where was that concern for help when she was boarding that plane? When she was swiping Luis Rivera's stolen money? When she was dancing in VIP lounges? He took a deep breath, turned back to the jury. Postpartum depression doesn't make you buy designer bags. It doesn't make you laugh on a yacht while your baby is dying. It doesn't make you party for 6 days straight without checking in once. Cristel Candelario is not a victim. The only victim in this case is the little girl she left behind. The courtroom was silent. Heavy. No one looked at Cristel. The jury members shifted, faces tight, eyes lowered. The weight of what they had just heard was undeniable. September 22nd, 2023. Sentencing day. The courtroom was silent as the judge entered. Cristel sat stiffly in her seat, hands cuffed, eyes swollen from sleepless nights. She hadn't spoken since the verdict was read. The jury had deliberated for only 2 hours before finding her guilty. The judge adjusted his glasses, his voice firm, final. Cristel Candelario, for the abandonment and neglect leading to the death of your child, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A sharp cry echoed through the courtroom. Cristel collapsed forward, sobbing, gasping for air. Her shoulders shook violently as reality crushed her. No more luxury. No more parties. No more running away. Only four walls. Only regret. Only time. The judge turned to Luis Rivera, who sat emotionless beside his attorney. Luis Rivera, for your involvement in high-level fraud schemes, you are sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Luis barely reacted. No breakdown. No words. He sat back, nodded once, as if he had already accepted his fate. The gavel slammed. It was over. As Crystal was led out of the courtroom, shackles around her wrists, the final question remained. Was justice served? Did she deserve life? Or was this simply the price of the choices she made? Who was Crystal Candelario, really? Was she always heartless? Or was she just another woman trying to escape the life she was born into? She grew up without stability, moving between foster homes, longing for something more. She wanted luxury, attention, power, the kind of life where struggle didn't exist. But wanting to escape a painful past doesn't justify the choices she made. A mother's first duty is to protect her child, and she failed. She saw Amaya as a burden, a weight holding her back. Instead of embracing motherhood, she ran from it. Instead of facing responsibility, she ignored it. And in doing so, she left her child to die alone. How many children suffer like Amaya? How many are left in empty apartments while their mothers chase something else? How many are neglected, forgotten, discarded? The signs are always there. Neighbors hearing cries that go ignored. Babies left in strollers for hours. Little ones hungry, desperate for attention. But how often do we step in? How often do we assume someone else will take care of it? Crystal wasn't the first mother to abandon her child, and she won't be the last. But the question remains. Did she ever think it would end this way? Did she ever imagine that the life she wanted so badly would lead her here? In the end, she got exactly what she wanted: an escape. But it wasn't in a luxury hotel. It wasn't on a yacht. It wasn't in the arms of a wealthy man. It was behind bars, alone, with nothing but time to think about what she had done. If this story made you think, if it made you feel something, don't just walk away. Stories like this happen more often than we realize. Innocent lives are lost because of neglect, selfishness, and the failure to act when something seems wrong.